subscribe. They found these pages in a rawhide poke beneath a shelf of stone in the superstition country 3 days after they found what remained of me. If you are reading this, then either I am dead, as I expect to be, or I have gone so far out of my own senses that death would be the kinder state. I set it down plain, so no preacher, deputy, or Arizona Ranger need guess at my meaning. My name is Jonas Creed. I am the man who robbed the bank at Florence on the 17th day of August, 1873. I am the man who shot Eli Mercer, the clerk, when he tried to raise the alarm. I did not mean at first to kill him, though I did kill him, and I know there is no easing that difference before God. He was a slight fellow in sleeve garters with ink on his fingers. I remember that foolish detail clearer than I recall his face. My pistol was already out. He moved quicker than I thought such a meek-looking body could move, and I fired from nerves more than malice. The ball caught him high in the chest. He sat down hard against the counter as if some great weariness had overtaken him. Then his mouth opened, and all the blood in him seemed to come at once. I took the money and fled south and east, changing horses twice, keeping to bad country where the law would have to follow in single file if they followed at all. I had planned it well, or so I believed. A water hole marked in memory, a box canyon for shelter, cartridges enough, jerked beef, coffee, and blankets. I reckoned to lie hid 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, till the first heat of the hunt wore off. Then I would cross into Sonora under another name. Had it been only rangers after me, I might have done it. The country I chose was cruel enough to keep honest men away. Bare volcanic ridges like broken teeth, arroyos full of loose stone, saguaros standing at dusk like gaunt sentries. In daytime, the sun beat the wits from a man. At night, every rock seemed to give off the heat it had swallowed, so that even in darkness the land felt fevered. I found a little shelf in the hills with a spring below it, no more than a slow seep out of stone. There I made camp. The first night passed without incident. I slept poorly, but that was to be expected. Every sound seemed too sharp. The cry of some night bird, the scratch of lizards, the whisper of wind pushing over the canyon mouth. I dreamed of Mercer sitting behind the bank counter with his head bowed as if adding figures, and when he lifted his face there was a round black hole where his shirt should have been buttoned. On the second night I heard the screaming. It began so faint I mistook it for a catamount. Then it swelled and stretched into a human sound, a man or woman in mortal agony, far off and yet near enough to lift the hair on my neck. I snatched up my revolver and crouched in the dark, straining to hear from which quarter it came. The sound bounced queerly among the rocks, first east, then west, then overhead, as though the hills themselves had taken to shrieking. It went on for near a minute and ceased all at once. I did not sleep after that. At dawn, I searched the washes and slopes around my camp. There was nothing. No rider, no campfire, no fresh tracks save my own and the usual marks of jackrabbit and coyote. I tried to laugh it off. Bad ground does tricks with sound. Any plainsman knows that. Yet the laugh came thin and would not hold. That day I caught myself glancing over my shoulder while brewing coffee, while filling the canteen, while chewing at dry beef. It angered me to feel fear in a place I had chosen. I told myself what troubled me was not spirits, but conscience, and I spat at the thought. A man in my line cannot afford much conscience. Toward sundown, I found something that had not been there before. On a flat stone near the mouth of my shelter lay a single cuff from a shirt sleeve, stiff with dark brown blood. I knew it at once, though I'd seen it only a moment in the bank. White linen, cheap, with a blue thread at the seam. Mercer had worn sleeve garters, and above one of them his cuff had shown just so. I took hold of myself then and searched every inch of my camp with method and care. I looked for pranksters, Apaches, Rangers, anything with flesh on it that I might shoot or curse. I found no one. I threw the cuff into the fire and watched it curl black among the coals. That night the laughter started. Not one voice, but many, low at first, like men in a saloon sharing some dirty joke. Then louder, not merry laughter, mind you, but the kind that comes when something cruel is being done and enjoyed. It rose from the darkness below the shelf where I camped, and every burst of it seemed answered by another farther up the canyon wall. I called out, cursing, demanding they show themselves. The laughter stopped. Then, from somewhere very close behind me, a voice said, "Don't shoot, Mr. Creed." I wheeled and fired before I knew I meant to. The muzzle flash lit bare stone, my bedroll, the black opening of the little shelter. No man stood there, yet I had heard Mercer's voice plain as a church bell. I spent that night with both pistols loaded across my knees until dawn paled the eastern sky. I was shaking by then from want of sleep and too much coffee. My thoughts had begun to slide away from me. I would attend to the most ordinary thing, pouring water, checking cartridges, and all at once find myself staring into space, listening for some sound not yet made. On the third day, I tried to leave. I packed in haste and led my horse down through the rocks to the wash. Before we had gone half a mile, the animal stopped dead, trembling. I jerked at the reins, then struck him. He would not move. I went to his head, meaning to drag him bodily if I had to, and saw what had balked him. Across the wash floor lay Eli Mercer. He lay on his back among the stones in the same city clothes he had worn at the bank, only now they were drenched black-red from collar to waist, and his chest was torn open so that I could see the ruin beneath. His face had gone the color of candle wax. Flies crawled in his eyes. I stumbled backward, drawing my pistol. The horse screamed and reared. Mercer's head turned toward me with a slow, sticky motion I can still hear in my mind. His mouth worked. Blood bubbled fresh at his lips, though he had been dead these many days. "You forgot the ledgers," he said. I fired 3 times into him. Dust leapt from the stones. The body was gone. There was no corpse, no blood, no sign anything had lain there at all. My horse broke from me then and bolted up the wash, saddle and all. I ran after him a little way, shouting, then stopped. I knew by the sound of his flight he would not be caught. So I hauled my supplies back to the shelf on foot, every step made under the certainty that unseen eyes followed me. That evening I found boot prints around my camp. They were not mine. They were town boots, narrow-soled, with a worn place at the right heel. They led from the spring to my fire pit to the entrance of the shelter, then stopped, as if the man making them had risen straight into the air. I do not know what hour it was when the ghosts came. Moonless night, no wind, the sort of stillness in which one's own pulse sounds separate from the body. At first, I saw only shapes among the saguaros below, pale forms moving between the black trunks of cactus. I thought them men and shouted again, though my voice cracked. They came nearer, and I saw they were no living company. There were 5 of them. Mercer in front, his chest soaked and hanging open. Behind him a woman with half her face peeled away as if by fire. A Mexican vaquero whose jaw dangled loose on the sinews. A child, no older than 10, with both legs mangled to ribbons. And last, a man I knew too well from a stage holdup outside Tucson 2 years before. An express guard named Talbot, who had taken my bullet through the throat and bled to death in the dust while I rifled the strongbox. All of them were blood-soaked, all of them twisted, crushed, torn, or opened in the very places I had killed them. Their eyes shone wet and white in the dark. Flies swarmed them, though no breeze stirred. They did not hurry. They climbed toward me step by dreadful step, and as they came, they laughed in those same low, ugly voices I had heard the night before. I fired till my revolver clicked empty. I know I hit Mercer square in the face. The ball passed through him like smoke and struck the rocks beyond. Talbot lifted one ruined hand and pointed at me as if singling me out before a jury. The child dragged itself by the elbows, leaving a slick trail that shone black in the starlight. Then they began to scream. Not with anger, not in threat. They screamed the way human beings scream when dying in terror and pain, and all at once I knew the voices were their death cries come back upon me. Every man I had shot, every soul I had trampled past and named necessity, all the noise of them had been waiting in the dark for me to be alone enough to hear it. I ran into the shelter like a whipped cur and covered my ears, yet the sounds got in. They filled the rock, the ground, my own bones. I heard Mercer gasping wetly for breath, heard Talbot choking through his neck wound, heard that unknown woman shriek as if flames still took her, heard the child crying for its mother in a voice so thin and hopeless that I bit my own hand to keep from joining in. When at length the screaming stopped, the laughter began again, right outside the shelter mouth. I have not slept since. I do not know whether it is the 4th day or the 7th. The light changes and returns, but I cannot trust time. When I close my eyes, I see them standing around me. When I open them, I see them still. Sometimes they are far off among the rocks, sometimes at arm's reach. Mercer sits beside the spring, dipping his bloody hands in the water. Talbot leans against the tallest saguaro, with his torn throat grinning. The child crouches at the mouth of the shelter and watches me without blinking. They never leave. I tried prayer this morning and could not remember enough words to make a full confession. I tried whiskey and vomited it up. I tried to walk away and found myself back at the shelf without knowing how I had turned. Once I thought to surrender to the rangers, but then the woman with the burned face laughed and I understood that no jail on earth lies deep enough to hold what hunts me. So I write this as plain account and testimony. To the men who find it, I robbed the bank at Florence. I shot Eli Mercer, clerk, without lawful cause. I have killed others besides him over the course of my wicked life, some in fear, some for gain, some because I was already damned enough that one more act seemed no great addition. I have buried some names and forgotten others, but they have not forgotten me. Whether these are truly ghosts sent to plague me, or whether a guilty mind can breed horrors stout enough to wear the shape of the dead, I cannot say. To me, the difference no longer matters. They are real enough to drive the wits from a man, real enough that I dare not step into darkness and dare not remain in light. They are here now as I finish. Mercer is nearest. He keeps touching the hole in his chest as if puzzled by it. The others stand behind him. None of them laugh any more. That is worse. The pistol lies to hand. I have one cartridge left. If hell is waiting, it cannot be more crowded than this canyon. This final note was recovered on October 2nd, 1873, by a patrol of Arizona Rangers searching the eastern reaches of the Superstition Mountains. The body of a white male, later identified as Jonas Creed, was found in a rock shelter near a spring, dead from a pistol shot under the chin. No other persons were present in the vicinity, nor were signs found of any struggle save those made by Creed himself. The foregoing pages were discovered folded in a rawhide poke beside the deceased and are entered here as evidence. Whether the man was pursued by spirits or only by his own guilty recollections, the result was the same. Jonas Creed, outlaw and murderer, escaped the law's rope, but not the sentence laid on him by his own mind.
I write this now with a roof over my head and orange trees growing not half a mile from my door, though for many months I believed I should never live to see California, nor any settled place again. If these pages sound gloomy, let whoever reads them remember that I do not set down fancy but memory. There is much in this world that ladies are not meant to witness, yet on the overland trail a woman may see more misery in one season than would suffice for a lifetime. We left Missouri in the spring of 1870 with 7 wagons, 23 souls in all, and hopes as bright as the painted signs at a mercantile window. My husband Thomas had sold his little farm after 3 seasons of poor yield and much debt. Word came back from California of fertile valleys, steady weather, and work enough for any man willing to bend his back. I did not wish to leave the graves of my mother and our first baby, but a wife goes where her husband must, and I tried to keep cheerful for the sake of our 2 living children, Sarah and little James. At the outset, it had almost the feeling of an outing. The mornings were cool, the grass green, and the wagons rolling in a brave line westward gave one a sense of purpose. The men walked beside the oxen with rifles over their shoulders. The women minded the children in kettles, and at night there was singing sometimes. Mrs. Cutter had a clear voice and knew many hymns. Young Eli Pritchard, who was just turned 19 and forever smiling, would whistle while greasing the wheels. It seemed impossible then that such a company could be broken. Yet the trail strips away notions quicker than a hard rain strips whitewash. Before we were a month out, the dust had become our constant companion. It lay over every blanket and biscuit, got into the baby's eyes, settled in the seams of one's skin and the back of one's throat until water itself tasted of dirt. We learned to rise before dawn, yoke up in the gray, travel while the air was yet tolerable, and halt only when the animals could go no farther. The women cooked when there was fuel, mended always, and slept so lightly that the creak of harness seemed to continue in one's dreams. Then the sickness began. It commenced with little Ada Bell, a child of 4, who complained of belly pains and could not keep down her supper. By morning she was passing water from both ends and too weak to cry. Mrs. Bell sat with her in the wagon while we jolted on, bathing her face and praying. We all knew what it was, though no one wished to name it. Dysentery travels with people as wolves follow buffalo. It wants little invitation beyond foul water, spoiled meat, bad luck, and too many weary bodies close together. Ada died the 2nd day after first taking ill. They buried her by a dry creek under stones because the ground was too stubborn for a proper grave. Mrs. Bell would not leave the spot until her husband half carried her away. After that, the flux came among us in earnest. Old Mr. Hanley took it next, and then one of the Cutter boys. We boiled what water we could, though fuel was scarce. We washed our hands, buried waste, scrubbed kettles, and still the sickness passed from one to another as if borne on the wind. The smell of it seemed to cling to camp. Some recovered after days of weakness, but never to the same strength. Others wasted before our eyes, their cheeks hollowing, their lips drying and cracking while they begged for water that only worsened their torment. By the time we had crossed into the more barren country, We had lost 4 souls to dysentery, among them old Mr. Hanley and the cutter boy Samuel, who had been no older than 13. His mother made no sound when they wrapped him in his blanket. She stood with her hands folded so tightly at the wrists the knuckles shone white, and looked not at the grave but at the horizon, as if all tears had dried up within her. The day Eli Pritchard died was one I have tried often to put from my mind, and never can. It was near noon and hot enough that the air above the ground quivered. We had halted by a patch of scrub and a mean little seep of water, hardly enough for the stock, but the oxen needed rest. Eli had gone a few yards off to gather brush for the fire. He was joking with Sarah only moments before, pretending the lizards darting among the rocks were tiny dragons from a storybook. Then we heard him cry out. There is a difference between a cry of surprise and a cry that carries mortal terror. Every person in camp knew it at once. The men snatched up rifles and ran. I saw Eli on the ground with both hands clutching his boot, his face gone the color of tallow. Beside him, thick as a man's wrist and marked like dry leaves, lay the rattlesnake coiled to strike again. Mr. Cutter shot it in pieces, but the mischief was done. They cut Eli's boot away, and there were 2 punctures above the ankle already swelling black around the edges. Mr. Bell tied a strap above the wound. Someone spoke of cutting and sucking out the poison, and one of the men tried it, though whether such measures avail anything I cannot say. Eli bore it at first with courage, gritting his teeth and saying he should be fit by evening. But in less than an hour his leg had swollen dreadful, and he began to shake so hard the wagon boards rattled under him. I sat with the women outside while his mother knelt over him. His cries changed as the poison climbed. He vomited again and again. His tongue thickened in his mouth. He begged for cool cloths, for water, for air, for the pain to stop. Toward the end he did not know his own name. He thrashed so violently that 3 men could scarcely hold him. His mother kept saying, "Eli, my darling boy, be still. Mama's here," though he no longer seemed to hear. When at last he died just before sundown, the whole camp felt altered. Death by sickness is cruel, but there is a slow rhythm to it, time to accustom the mind. That snake bite was like watching a strong green tree struck by lightning and burned from the inside. We buried him the next morning on a rise above the trail. Mrs. Pritchard placed his harmonica in the grave with him, for he had carried it in his pocket since boyhood. After Eli's death, a hush settled over us. Even the children spoke less. We were all thinner. The oxen showed ribs. The flour was low, bacon nearly gone, and coffee so precious it was measured by pinches. Still, we drove west, because there is no choosing once you are deep committed. To turn back with failing supplies is no safer than to go on. The wilderness does not pity indecision. It must have been some weeks later when we came upon the other party. We had seen signs first, an abandoned crate, a broken wheel half sunk in alkali dust, then the scattered bones of livestock stripped clean by scavengers. Mr. Bell said perhaps a train had lightened its load, but soon the signs grew darker. We found a wagon tilted in a wash, canvas torn, one side burned. A little farther on lay another, with a child's shoe beneath it, and no child near. The place was very still, though not peaceful. The men told us women to stay back, but I had climbed down already and seen enough. There were graves, if such they could be called, shallow and disturbed. One body lay not buried at all, only wrapped in filthy canvas, the feet uncovered. I noticed the bones before I understood what I saw. Long bones split open, ribs hacked, not by wolves alone, nor cleanly, as butchers dress an animal, but broken by desperate hands. Near one cold fire pit lay a kettle with grease hardened thick upon the bottom. Thomas stepped before me then, but not before I had taken it in. Cannibalism is a word genteel people use in books and speeches. On that barren stretch it was not a word, but evidence. Hunger had lived there and done its work. We might have turned away at once, but Sarah cried out. From the shadow of the last wagon 2 men had emerged. I shall never forget them. They were gaunt beyond belief, skin drawn tight over skulls, beards hanging in ropes, clothes in tatters stiff with old stains. Their eyes were wrong. not white as a blind person's, but bright and fevered, darting from face to face without sense or shame. One held a butcher knife. The other carried a pistol with no ramrod, gripped backward in his hand like a club. They stared at our horses, at the children, at us women, with such naked want that my stomach turned. Mr. Bell called to them, asking their names and whether they needed water. The man with the knife laughed, a dry, cracked sound that scarcely resembled mirth. The other said, "Meat," as plain as if naming a tool. Then they rushed us. Everything after happened in confusion and terrible swiftness. Thomas shoved me behind the wagon tongue so hard I fell to my knees. The children screamed. The men raised their guns and shouted for them to stop. But those poor ruined creatures did not halt, did not reason, did not behave as men who wish to live. Madness had stripped that away. They came on with mouths open, the knife flashing in the sun. 2 shots rang out together. The first man spun and dropped so suddenly he seemed to fold at the middle. The second staggered another few paces, blood spreading across his shirt, yet still tried to lift the pistol. Mr. Cutter fired again and put him down. No one moved for several moments. The silence afterward was dreadful, broken only by little James sobbing into my skirt. The men examined the bodies and said there could be no doubt. Those survivors had gone mad from starvation and whatever horrors they had endured. One of them had human flesh in the pocket of his coat, wrapped in cloth as if saved for later. I did not see it myself, only heard Thomas say it that night in a whisper, thinking me asleep. I was grateful not to have laid eyes on it. We left that place as quickly as we could. No one wished to camp within sight of those wagons. Even the air there felt cursed. Yet we carried the knowledge onward with us. Civilization is a thin wall, and hunger, thirst, and fear beat upon it, until sometimes it breaks clean through. By the mercy of God, we did reach California before the winter rains. We came reduced in number and changed in spirit. Of the 23 who departed Missouri, only 16 arrived. The others lie scattered along the trail, in nameless places their families may never see. Folks here speak often of opportunity, of land, of beginnings. Those things are true enough. But whenever I hear some eager person talk of the westward road as though it were a grand adventure, I think of little Ada by the creekside grave, of Samuel Cutter and old Mr. Hanley wasted by dysentery, of poor Eli writhing under the snake venom, and of those 2 wild-eyed men among the broken wagons who had forgotten they were human. It was hard going to California, harder than any person safely housed can rightly imagine, and there are times, even now, when I wake in the dark expecting to hear the groan of wheels, the coughing of oxen, and the wind moving over a country so wide that all one's grief seemed to vanish into it without leaving a trace.
I set this down by lamplight with a trembling hand, not in the expectation that any man will believe me, but so that when my own senses fail entirely, there may remain some account of what we saw beyond the cross timbers in the autumn of 1880. My name is of no consequence. I was then serving as a ranger under a captain whose judgment I trusted, and I had with me my partner, Elijah Boone, as steady and competent a lawman as ever drew breath. We had been sent northward and westward after a fugitive by the name of Silas Gentry, a horse thief and murderer wanted for the shooting of a storekeeper outside Jacksboro. Gentry had crossed into the nation, where the broken country, the cedar breaks, and the old war trail swallow a man up as a creek swallows rainwater. For 5 days, Boone and I rode his sign through a land that seemed made for hiding sin. There were long reaches of yellow grass gone dry under the sun, belts of blackjack oak and post oak that shut out the light, and lonely gullies where the very air felt stale, as though no wind had stirred there since creation. Sometimes we found the ashes of Gentry's camp no older than one night. Once, a strip of blue shirt caught on a mesquite thorn. We reckoned we were close. On the evening of the 6th day, we came upon a place the Comanche scouts used to warn of, a shallow basin ringed with rock, with a stagnant pool in the center black as printer's ink. We had no desire to camp there, yet the horses were spent and the sky was already reddening down to the west. Boone looked over that hollow and said, "I don't like the feel of this ground." Neither did I. There are places in the frontier that trouble a man for no reason he can name. The birds go absent, the insects still themselves, and all at once you feel yourself an intruder where no Christian ought to stand. Even our horses rolled their eyes and snorted at the dark water. Still, we made camp a half-mile off in a stand of scrub oak. We ate cold bacon and hard bread and kept no fire. Near midnight, Boone woke me with one finger to my shoulder. He pointed toward the basin. I saw, between the trunks, 4 figures moving against the starlight. At first, I took them for gentry and Confederates. Then I saw by their dress and bearing that they were Indians. 4 warriors, armed, riding slowly in a line abreast as if searching. Their ponies stepped oddly, with heads low and ears pinned flat. The riders did not speak. They made no signal I knew. Moonlight showed feathers hanging from one man's hair and beadwork on another's leggings, but everything looked dim and spoiled, as though seen through smoke. We lay quiet till they passed. Boone whispered that perhaps they had not scented us. Yet one of them turned his head toward our thicket and sat staring straight into the dark where we crouched. I say staring, though at that distance I ought not to have been able to make out his face. Even so, I knew with sudden certainty that he saw us plainly. Then he lifted one arm. The other 3 wheeled at once and came on. There was no time for parley. Boone fired first with his carbine, dropping the nearest pony in mid-stride. The beast screamed and pitched over, throwing its rider. I rose and fired my Colt at another. The reports crashed through the oaks and set the horses plunging at their tethers. The warriors answered with guns of their own, one with a Spencer, another with an old army revolver, and splinters jumped from the tree by my cheek. The fight scattered in the brush, confused and savage. Boone caught one through the shoulder, and I saw the man spin half round in the saddle. Another came on through the scrub straight at us, his mouth open in a snarl. I fired and missed. Boone shot him from 10 feet, and the bullet took him square in the chest, enough to knock him backward over his pony's rump. What followed was the first thing that turned my blood cold. The man lay still a moment in the dust. Then, in the same unhurried manner a drunkard might rise from sleep, he rolled to one knee and stood up again. Boone cursed and fired once more. I saw the ball strike him just left of the breastbone. I know a mortal hit when I see one. Any living man would have dropped stone dead. This one only staggered, then came forward again. He stepped into a shaft of moonlight between the trees. His eyes were white, not the whites showing around the iris as when a horse is frightened. I mean the whole of both eyes, blank and milk pale, with no pupil, no color, nothing human in them. From the corners of his mouth ran a black stream that, in the moonlight, I took for shadow. When he came nearer, I saw it was blood, thick upon his chin and spattered down the front of his shirt. Boone shouted, "Jesus preserve us!" The others showed themselves then, circling in the brush. All 4 had the same white eyes. All 4 bled from the mouth. One had a hole through his neck that bubbled darkly when he breathed, yet he made no sound. Another dragged a leg broken below the knee and still advanced at a steady pace, as if the ruined limb were no more hindrance than a twig caught in his moccasin. I emptied my revolver into the man before me. One ball struck his collarbone, one his belly, another, I know, went through the heart, for I saw the cloth kick inward at the center of his chest and blood burst from his back. He folded down, and I thought at last he was finished. He got up. I tell you true, he got up with that hole in him and walked on. Boone seized the Henry from his saddle boot and began firing as quick as a man shelling corn. The lever clacked in the dark, shots one upon another, until the basin below answered us with hollow echoes. 2 of the warriors went down under that storm of lead. One rose immediately. The other crawled a few feet, then stood, swaying like a sapling in wind. There is a point where fear ceases to be an emotion and becomes a substance in the body, cold and heavy as lead. I felt it then. Every tale I had ever laughed at, every old Mexican story of the dead that wander, every Comanche warning of bad medicine and cursed grounds came back to me. The warrior with the shattered chest rushed Boone. My partner braced and fired from the hip. By providence or accident, the bullet struck square in the forehead. That one fell as though his strings had been cut. He did not rise again. Boone cried out, "The head! Shoot the head!" We backed together, firing deliberate now, not at center mass as any trained man would, but high, at the face and skull. One of them lurched in close enough for me to smell him. He carried a stink like opened graves after rain, sweet and rotten together. His lips had drawn back from his teeth. There was blood on them, but no breath came. I thrust my revolver almost against his temple and pulled the trigger. The top of his head broke apart. He dropped at my boots. Another sprang from the brush and caught Boone by the coat front before I could stop him. Boone drove his bowie knife under the thing's jaw to the hilt. It made no sign of pain. They wrestled like bears. I snatched up my rifle and fired into the warrior's ear so close the flash scorched Boone's hair. Both men went down. Boone rolled free, half strangled, and the other lay twitching in the leaves. The last of them had been the one with the broken leg. He stood a little apart, watching us with those white eyes. I cannot say how long. Then he put 2 fingers into the blood at his mouth and marked something upon his own breast. Whether it was a sign of his people or some devil's token, I do not know. He turned and limped toward the basin. Boone shouted for him to halt. He did not. Boone fired and missed in the dark. I fired once and saw his head snap forward. He pitched into the black water with scarce a splash. We waited for him to rise. He did not. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfight. No wind, no owl, no coyote, only our own gasping and the horses jerking at their lines. Boone sat with his hands over his face, and when he lowered them I saw he had blood on his neck, not his own, but that black, foul blood from the warrior that had seized him. We did not sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, we went to the bodies. 3 lay where we had shot them in the head. They were Indians, yes, but altered by something dreadful. Their skin had a gray cast under the copper, their tongues were swollen and dark, and the eyes, God help me, the eyes were still white even in death. Their wounds in the chest and belly were numerous enough to kill any 3 men twice over. Yet, save for the headshots, none appeared to have mattered. As for the basin, we found no body in it, only the black water, stagnant and smooth, and on the mud at its edge the track of one lame foot leading out toward the north. We never found Silas Gentry. Perhaps he saw what we saw and fled clean out of the territory. Perhaps those things had him already. Boone sickened within 3 days. He would not speak of that night except once, when his fever was highest. Then he gripped my wrist and whispered, "Don't let 'em bite through." He died before we reached Fort Richardson, so I write this for whoever chances upon it after me. I have worn the badge long enough to know the many forms evil may take in a man. But those were no men, though once they must have been. I shot one clean through the heart and saw him stand. I saw blood running from dead mouths and white eyes fixed on me without sight. I saw only head wounds put them down for good. What were they? I am a ranger, not a scholar, and I leave speculation to preachers and medicine men. Yet I ask it plain. Were they undead? Had some pestilence taken them and left only rage moving in their flesh? Or had we crossed into some cursed pocket of that old country where the dead do not know enough to lie still? Whatever the truth, I know this much. There are regions beyond the settlements where law does not ride, where even the Almighty seems far off, and where a man may meet something that no bullet was ever meant for. And if ever again I see white eyes in the dark, I shall not wait to ask questions.